The term persecution is being overused.
All too many people throughout the world are being persecuted.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you very much, Mark, and we're very happy that you've decided to join us today. We always look forward to our get-togethers around this table, and we know that you won't be disappointed with today's subject. Before we begin, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
Hello, my name is Mel Robeck. I'm an Assemblies of God minister, and I serve the church as professor of church history and ecumenics at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California.
I'm Rabbi Jordan Offsire, living and doing active retirement and being actively engaged to work for the Jewish community, to teach classes, and to officiate at life cycle events.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Bert Beach. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist ordained minister, served our church half my life in Europe and half my life based in the Washington, D.C. area at our world headquarters.
I'm Othel H. Lakey, a bishop retired in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, living in Buford, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Concordia University in Austin, Texas. It is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Well, as you can see, once again, we have an excellent panel assembled here, and they're up for today's discussion, I'm sure. And that has to do with what a group of Christian leaders in the Middle East recently warned. They warned that the use of the term persecution among certain groups in the West is playing into the hands of extremists. There is much suffering and violence throughout the region, and it affects everyone, regardless of their religion. Some seem to suggest that it is only Christians who are experiencing persecution. But it is also the case that many Muslims experience persecution as well. These Christian leaders have called both Christians and Muslims to stand together against such extremism. They have also pointed out that Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's Matthew 5:10. All those who seek dignity, democracy, freedom, and prosperity are under attack, they have said. We must stand together and speak out in truth and freedom. All of us must also be aware that the outside world will not make any real move to protect us. International and local political powers seek their own interests. Close quote. Well, thank you for joining us. I'd like for our panelists today to think about this subject and consider at least these three questions. First of all, what is the meaning of Jesus' words that those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness are blessed, as he said? The second question, how should the term persecution be used within a context such as the Middle East? And finally, what might be some other ways of speaking about the attacks that have driven so many Christians from the Middle East in recent years? Let's return to those who opened our program with their opening statements and ask them to expand them just a little bit. We'll go back to Reverend Plumley to begin, if you could, please.
Thank you. Actually, I want to take the conversation out of the international arena. I certainly don't want to be one to deny the persecution that is very real and exists in some horrible ways being aimed toward a lot of different people in a lot of different places. What I want to talk about is what I would call hyperbole on the domestic scene. When I hear people talking about having to pay income tax, being placed in slavery, being persecuted as a slave because they have to pay income tax, that's the kind of misuse of the word persecution that I'm talking about. When I hear people say that gun control is what Hitler did to the Jewish people, no, that's not what Hitler did to the Jewish people. When I hear people say that the religious right is being persecuted for their religious beliefs in America in 2014 because they are not being allowed to discriminate against people like they want to discriminate against people, that's not persecution. And the problem with that sort of use of persecution is that it denigrates real persecution by exaggeration of one's own discomfort. It is not persecution to have to put up with people who disagree with you, okay? It is persecution when you lose your job because of your faith. It is persecution when you get beheaded. You know, it is persecution when you get disemboweled or when you become enslaved because of your faith. That's religious persecution. Those things are happening around the world, but those aren't the sorts of things that I hear over and over again as people saying, "Oh, I'm being persecuted. I'm being oppressed." It reminds me of the Monty Python movie with the guy going, "Oh, I'm being oppressed. I'm being oppressed." Baloney.
Oh, thank you. All right. With that, let's come across to Rabbi Offsire and your expanded view.
From Monty Python.
Baloney is still echoing. I have to have this.
That's a theological term, by the way. We want to make
A theological term.
Yes.
So, Tom, with all love and respect, I agree with much of what you've said, but you've taken the discussion in an entirely different direction, which is your prerogative.
Since I started, I get to do
that. But that's what you have done, and I'm not saying that critically. I'm saying that in the sense of realistically, with respect to the statement that the moderator had made and the direction that you had taken. I'm in agreement with that direction. Having said that, I want to make sure that I will have said clearly that persecution, which is with which Webster would agree, and that's the not the standard but the expanded version, is indeed present throughout the world, and as you had said, you had given those illustrations, and I think that what all of us need to remember and to understand is that persecution, unfortunately, means too many different things to too many different people. Persecution means doing that which is absolutely wrong in the eyes of any reasonable person to other individuals or groups. And that kind of persecution is rampant throughout the world and exists in our country as well. And we would do well ourselves to act on the basis of our understanding of what is moral and ethical and decent, and separate between those who pander for the wrong reason and those who need help for all the right and tragic reasons.
All right, thank you. Next to you is Dr. Beach, and your perspective and thoughts on
Well, I think Tom Plumley has a point that the word persecution, or religious discrimination and so forth, can be overused because it's associated with other problems that may be touched upon in the picture, and then people emphasize, instead of the economic problems they're faced, they talk about religion and so on. So I think you have a point, but I think it can't be denied that Christians are by far the most people that are discriminated against and persecuted, literally, in many parts of the world. Having said that, we have to say there are many Muslims that are being persecuted by, usually I think, fellow Muslims, if you can use the word fellow, but at least Muslims from other branches, maybe Islamists, fanatical, and so forth. There's no doubt that when people have economic problems and immigrate and leave, they very often associate it also with religion to some extent. I've noticed once I had an interview with some people that wanted some support for their living in the United States that left from Cuba. And I interviewed them, talked to them, and asked them, well, now, what was the problem? They were persecuted in Cuba because they were Seventh-day Adventists, supposedly. What was their problem? Every single problem they mentioned to me was economic. They didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough this, they didn't have enough that. But it wasn't religious persecution as such. And usually with persecution, it has to be attached, I think, with religion somehow. Usually you don't talk about persecution for political, I suppose you could say political persecution, but then you have to use the word political to make clear. But having said all this, let us say the Seventh-day Adventist Church is illegal in the state of Syria. It's the only country in the world that I know of where we're illegal, and for very stupid reasons from way back about 40, 50 years ago. They still haven't gotten solved. I thought I was beginning to solve the problem, and then we had the Iraqi war broke out and all that, and the whole thing collapsed, we're trying to say. So I think we need to be careful with the word persecution, but also acknowledge that there are many people around the world that are being persecuted. But very often it is tied to political, social, economic, political party reasons, and that type of thing.
All right, thank you very much. Let's come across the table, and Bishop Lakey, your perspective here, please.
I'm not quite clear from the moderator's statement of why the leaders are saying that the term persecution is sort of detrimental. I don't quite see the connection. Whether or not we're being persecuted, that's one thing. But to say that when we use the term, it emboldens the extremist. Can anyone enlighten me on what they're trying to suggest there?
Well, Dr. Robeck perhaps can. He's given some thought to this.
I ran across this article actually that talked about this kind of stuff, and one of the things that they were saying was that Muslims have felt like they were persecuted by Christians for centuries, especially from the Crusades onward. And for Christians to say, we're the ones that's being persecuted, is probably not adequate when we're talking about Muslims in the Middle East who have felt persecuted for 1,000 years. So that's really, I think, where it's coming from in terms of their thinking. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That helps. And with that in mind, is there any further thing you'd like to comment about?
Well, I think there's something to be said for that, because we always kind of deal with whose ox is being gored is the one the one who deals with it most, and Christians and Westerners do have a tendency to overblow their problems without proper deference to what has been happening historically. And I can understand us saying we are persecuted, but some of the things that are happening, I suspect, are reactions to what Mel Robeck has just said. Some of the centuries-old kinds of things that have been going on, and so there's sort of an adjustment period going on, and I think we may want to look again at the term. I don't know a different term, but what do we really mean by persecution? Is it that a law is being passed that you cannot evangelize, or is it, as I think Tom Plummer or someone pointed out, you may be beheaded if you go to church on the day you're supposed to go? There is a difference between the two, and which one are we really talking about?
All right, thank you. Across the table, we haven't yet heard from Dr. Trovall. Dr. Beach will come back in a moment, but Dr. Trovall, please.
Sure. Tom, I agree that persecution, I think, is overused in our culture. I mean, how a word is used is key. And I mean, you've also enlightened me as to this other broader cultural context where it seems that it's something very serious and needs to be taken seriously, and it's exactly the right word. I was thinking about Jesus' words in that first question. Those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness are blessed. And I was thinking to the Beatitudes, both the Matthean and also the Lucan Beatitudes. He's saying, at least as I understand, when you stand up for doing what's right, I mean, you are going to get opposition because that's just the nature of our world that we live in. and that you're going to bring on a certain kind of trouble to yourself. Now, as I recall in the Lucan Beatitudes, Jesus he doesn't go blessed, he does woe. And he does this, woe to you if all people speak well of you. In other words, if you don't have any opposition, then you're not telling the truth. You're not living authentically. And I was just reflecting on persecution, because there it's almost simply in terms of words and what people are saying about you. And that actually made me think of, and I'll wrap up with this. We had a young woman who was acting in our theater program, who was acting as a Muslim in a play, and she happened to go to the local coffee shop near Concordia. And she stood in line, and two young men came up and said, "Back of the line, Taliban." And I thought, wow, she isn't even a Muslim. She's just dressed the way she's dressed. And wow, it was just, it's one of these stunning things that you just kind of get sick about.
Yes, Rabbi, I'm sorry.
And a quick footnote on the shootings in Kansas City by that crazy didn't kill Jews. Who was an anti-Semite, killed other people. That was the accomplishment.
Prejudice and
God
bias
forbid.
is sometimes blind. Yeah, it's yes. Please come back over to Dr. Robeck, then, please.
Now, I have mixed feelings ever since Tom spoke. In part because I spend a lot of my time on the global scene, so this makes sense to me as I think about it at one level, and yet what I don't want to do is to let the pressure off of governments regarding the persecution of anybody, but I would say especially Christians at this point in time, because I think they are the most persecuted group in the whole of the world. And that goes for a whole range of things, not simply beheadings, but the practice of religion, the possibility of evangelism, but that's not where I would be coming from. But certainly the practice of religion in so many countries is just absolutely confined. They're closing down a lot of, in Malaysia, for instance, which is a relatively open culture, churches are not allowed to build buildings. So what they're doing is they're renting hotels. So now they're passing legislation to prohibit churches from meeting in hotels. So they're going to factories. Next thing they're going to do is pass legislation to keep them out of factories. Well, where are they going to go? The point is they don't want them. And I would say that in the Middle East, we've seen an enormous exodus of Christians from the Middle East. We went into Iraq claiming that we would provide them democracy and people could have freedom of religion. Not so. About 80% of the Christians in Iraq have disappeared. It's the middle class, business owners, educated, and when Iraq gets back together, they have a hard time putting their government together because they have nobody who's in that particular class that can help them along. On the other hand, Tom, I think about, the second you label people religious right, there's a sense in which there is a persecutoria statement there. If you think about the marginalization of people, that's a good way to marginalize them, especially on, say, social issues like homosexuality, where, they want to say, theologically, there's no room for this kind of action, that it's a sinful action according to Scripture as they understand it. But the problem is that they get labeled then as homophobes, which is not really fair, because that's not what they're saying. They're not saying we hate homosexuals, some do, no question. But that's not the point. And so they're, in a sense, persecuted for their position. The problem is the majority of the church is there. The Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Pentecostal churches, the evangelicals, for the most part, are all saying homosexuality is not good for for anybody. And what they're up against then is a culture that says, you guys are going to have to be made over in our image or else. And I think that's really a persecutorial stance. If they're standing up for, quote, righteousness, if in fact this is sinful lifestyle, then I think the persecution is something that they have to expect at one level.
Very quickly, to kind of trail back into this, does persecution require, in order for it to be legitimate, quote-unquote, persecution, does it require physical violence, bodily harm?
I don't think
any
so.
kind of destruction? But it can't be just, words or positions taken?
Well,
or can it be?
Yeah, I think words and positions taken, I think, can be very marginalizing and very hurtful.
Because sometimes we associate persecution with the bodily violence. We think, well, if there's no bodily violence or harm, that means it can't be persecution. But
words
persecution, words hurt. Thank you.
All you have to do is talk to Lakey about the N-word.
Yes, Dr. Beach.
Then there's some people that like to take the concept of persecution that Christ has uplifted it, so to speak, by saying, blessed are you if you're persecuted and so
Well, they go
forth.
after it.
And so therefore you should encourage persecution.
Ah, wow.
I've had that.
No.
That problem. I've dealt with that with congregation, saying, well, we should have persecution.
To actually seek persecution?
And they
Wow.
seek persecution and all that. And I don't think,
and that's
when Christ says that, blessed are you because of the good cause that you represent, but not persecution is not a
There's
blessing.
Happenstance, and then there's the response.
Well,
I'm afraid we're out of time. Tom, I wish we had more time, but you'll have a closing statement in just a few moments, so save it for then. For right now, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome back. We are thankful that you stayed by right to the very end, but we're not quite finished yet. We have those closing statements, and we go to Mel Robeck to begin.
Persecution is a real issue, and I think all of us need to be concerned about people who are persecuted, people who are marginalized, people who are not allowed to speak for themselves and to be accepted within society. But I do think we have to be very careful about how we define that, how we look at that, and the kinds of names that we use for others.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robeck. And now, Reverend Plumley.
What Dr. Beach was talking about at the end of the program, about those who want to consider themselves persecuted in order that they will be considered among the blessed of God, that is precisely the overuse of the word that I'm talking about. And I'm saying that denigrates and by exaggeration. It shrinks what real persecution is by exaggeration.
Perhaps even abuse of the term. Let's come next to Bishop Lakey.
Thank you very much. I think we must be a bit more judicious in our use of the term persecution, because it can mean too many different things to too many different people. At the same time, we must recognize that there are many places in the world where what people believe is subject to all sorts of things that are not to their good or interest. And hopefully, the promise that they are blessed for standing up for righteousness is true, no matter what or where they are.
Thank you very much, Bishop Lakey. And now let's come across to Dr. Troval.
I agree that we should be concerned about all people who are persecuted everywhere, and to try to pay attention to find out those places in the world where that's happening. Today, this has been enlightening. This is always enlightening for me. I learned so many things. About that comment about seeking the suffering or seeking the persecution, when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, in the Christian point of view, that cross that's laid upon us isn't one that we seek out. It's one that comes naturally when you serve people. When you serve people, there's going to be an element of the death of self, and that always hurts, and that's a piece of what that suffering is. It's in service of humanity.
All right, thank you very much. And now Dr. Beach.
Well, as we have mentioned in the discussion, there's a great deal of persecution, of religious persecution. Usually, I at least associate the term persecution with religion. If somebody is persecuted politically, I would say it's oppression. And I would use another term. So persecution sounds to me more religious, generally speaking. At least in French, persécution, I can't imagine them seeing that as being political. I mean, it may be political in a way, but it's based on religion. So let us be careful, not overdo it, and not try to claim persecution when we're really having a hard time economically, simply because of the economic conditions.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Beach. And now, Rabbi Offsire, your closing statement, and you have the time to do so.
To add just a footnote to the discussion, we know that it's all too easy to follow mobs to do something. And I would like to suggest that each of us needs to reflect within his or her own conscience about the kinds of decisions that we take, the kinds of actions that we are intending to take, and not to be allowed to be swayed by something which may be popular or may be seen to be desirable. Act out of conscience, my friends.
And thank you very much. This has indeed been a very enlightening discussion. I hope perhaps we can come back to this someday, as it deserves a little fairer treatment with a little more time. And we're so very grateful for your tuning in today and joining in this discussion. We realize it seems a little one-sided in that you're not able to interact. I'm sure you might be talking to your television or to your monitor, and sometimes maybe even becoming just a little bit frustrated by what goes on here at the town hall. But that's part of the genius of this program, to get people to thinking, to really reflecting on what it is that goes on in our churches, in our religious communities, and in our world, for that matter. And today, I think you've seen a good example of what it means to be able to discuss these things openly and freely, like we have done here today. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you'll be back with us again next time. And please do call your friends. Tell them about this great program that we call the American Religious Town Hall. I'm sure they will appreciate sitting down with you and watching the next program. For now, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, and not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you.